Well, Matt, it's funny you should say that. Is it contentious? Was there, as my great friend Carl Weinberg at High Frequency Economics put it, a brawl in Biarritz? I don't think so. If there was a brawl, they're using those big kid gloves or those big inflatables to bash each other. It almost seems that the blows that have been landed are all pretty soft as well and almost pre-orchestrated so that it's meant so that everyone isn't bashing up on President Trump, so that it's not G6 plus one as well. It seems that, as you quite rightly said in the introduction there, every issue under the sun has been addressed in some way, shape or form. But have they made progress on coordinated action on the key issues? I have my questions. I've been to a lot of G7s, G8s, G20s over the years. And the fact that, of course, there was an admission before we even got here that there would be no communique does act as an admission that they're not going to make much progress on coordinated action, perhaps not wanting to offend each other, not wanting to offend the US president, who there was a lovely quote from France 24 saying the US president has the ability to make or break international summits depending on his mood and the content of his Twitter account. I thought that puts it beautifully. Anyway, let's get back to Brexit. I haven't spoken about that yet this week as well. A lot of contention on the sidelines. Boris Johnson, of course, Prime Minister here as well. What did Donald Tusk have to say about the UK Prime Minister and about the situation regarding Brexit?
The one thing I will not cooperate on is no deal. And I still hope that Prime Minister Johnson will not like to go down in history as Mr. No Deal. We are willing to listen to ideas that are operational, realistic, and acceptable to all member states, including Ireland, if and when the UK government is ready to put them on the table.
So huge contention, of course. Apparently Donald Tusk and Mr. Johnson had a very cordial meeting last night, but again, no real progress on the backstop and Brexit as well. But on the other side of the coin, the meeting apparently between Mr. Johnson and Mr. Trump, the other key Donald here as well, apparently went beautifully as well. And just listen in to the eulogising tones from the US president about a potential deal with the British after Brexit.
I guess it's fantastic. Many deals, talking about many different deals, but we're having a good time. As far as UK and the United States, we're working on a very big trade deal, and I think it's going to work out very well. So thank you very much. See you later.
It's going to work out very well once the UK has lost the anchor around its ankle, I think the quote was from the US president as well, then they can go forth and do a big deal. But of course, Boris Johnson's not kidding himself. One of the world's biggest country versus the British on a negotiating deal is going to be very, very tough work as well. And despite the fact that the UK Prime Minister would like an all-encompassing deal, there are those like John Bolton in the administration who want to go sector by sector. But let's listen in about some of the realities that Boris Johnson has admitted that UK will face when it deals with the US on a trade deal.
Yeah, but obviously, I have memories of American trade negotiations in the past, and I have a formidable respect for US trade negotiations. And I know that there'll be some tough talks ahead, because at the moment, you know, we still don't. I don't think we sell a single joint of British lamb to the United States. We don't sell any beef. We don't sell any pork pies. And there are clearly huge opportunities for the UK to penetrate the American market in the way that we currently do. We're very interested to talk about that.
So there's Mr. Johnson talking about everything from legs of lamb, bell peppers, shower trays, and of course the mighty Melton Mowbray pork pie, which I'm not sure if Matt and Hadley have ever tried, but maybe they should. It is a great, delicious treat as well. But actually, he was also telling Sky News, our affiliate, last night as well, that actually Britain wouldn't necessarily pay the full £39 billion agreed withdrawal price. Of course, if there was no withdrawal deal with the European Union. So he's saying that's not a threat. He's saying that's just a reality. It's one of the nuances here in Biarritz. Not Biarritz, that's a Freudian slip, Biarritz. But Hadley, I tell you, there were curveballs left, right and centre, and some of them came from Monsieur Macron as well, inviting uninvited guests perhaps.
Yes, indeed. And I think if there had been a real brawl there, that you, Steve, would have been right in the middle of it. I want to ask you about that uninvited guest or that invited guest last minute. I mean, Javed Zarif, no surprise he'd take them up on that offer. But in spite of all of these tweets and all of these headlines, do you think anything is really going to move that potential deal forward? Because at the end of the day, the United States still says we're not having it.
I think you make the excellent point as well. I mean, the fact that Mohammed Javad Zarif, who of course is subject to some US sanctions, was here at all only a very short while after he was in Paris as well. Can one call that a stunt by Monsieur Macron, or was it actually really smart diplomacy to try and get the Iranians and the US fairly close? If it was the latter, I'm afraid it didn't quite work as well, because of course Monsieur Macron had a meeting with Mr. Zarif as well. Apparently there was a briefing between the Iranians and the British and the Germans as well, but the Americans stood very far away, in fact saying that no US delegate here had a meeting with the Iranians. In fact, President Trump was here, was saying, in fact, in very kind of soothing tones, look, it's up to Monsieur Macron. He can go his own path on this one as well, but the US would not be going along a joint path along those lines at the moment, of course. And a lot of the dissension comes on whether the Iranians are allowed to carry on exporting oil. The Iranians would like to export more oil in return for turning back to the terms of that original 2015 deal, agreed, of course, with the Obama administration, not with the Trump administration as well. So Iran took up a lot of time here as well. But what I find absolutely fascinating is that they were even talking about Iran when, let's go back to the basics on G7. It was started actually in France in the mid-1970s, Rambouillet, to talk about economic coordination, interestingly enough, on the wake of, again, Middle East tensions, on the back of what was the oil shock, the first great oil shock of the early 70s. And that's why the G6 and then the G7, when Canada came on board in 1976, came about. Isn't it absolutely fascinating for our viewers that at a time of massive crisis, and we haven't even talked about the China situation as well, at a time of tariffs, at a time of digital taxation issues, it seems that the only stuff that these guys can agree on appears to be some form of joint action about coping with the Amazon rainforest, which I wonder how the Brazilians feel about that international joint action. And as we saw in Chantilly at the G7 finance ministers meeting, talking about external threats such as Libra. But when it comes to the really big stuff about the economy that the G7 was formed to talk about, I'm not seeing global coordinated action at all.
Hey everybody, it's Hadley Gamble from our new CNBC Middle East Bureau in Abu Dhabi. Thanks for stopping by. Now to watch more, you can try one of the videos that just popped up on your screen. And don't forget to subscribe.